titties should bounce. You dig dimes, I do ounces and larger amounts. Grilled cheese and no pie. Put together the sound to break it down, shake the ground, pull it out when it counts. Let a dog chase the cat till she's ready to pounce. A lot of rap acts are just that and act, and I doubt that joker walkers hope to like me and my people are.
Surprise, motherfucker!
You know, I find it ironic that the tool of feminism and the feminists that employ it is by far the most odious form of oppression, not just for men, but for women as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Men suffer far more under the iron curtain of Marxist feminism, but for some odd reason, women seem to be more miserable than ever. And that's because the worst thing Western women could have done is to bog themselves down in the tar pits chasing the feminist fantasy that speaks to the very worst parts of the female psyche. Indeed, the entire reason that women have been such a privileged class throughout history is because only the good parts of her nature were displayed openly in society for everyone to see. Feminism, for the first time possibly in recorded history, has allowed Western women to show their true nature, and it's the worst possible thing they could have done for themselves, because now the physical beauty of women comes as a double-edged sword of documented and well-known unbridled greed, manipulation, and toxicity. And not since the days of Samson and Delilah have men been so keenly aware of the destruction and havoc women can visit upon them. And so now, women can no longer fetch the admiration and devotion of men in any meaningful way. Men aren't amazed or awestruck when we look at women. Men are suspicious and cautious and frankly want as little to do with women as possible. And when men want as little to do with something as possible, we strip down our interaction with it to the necessities, which means that men generally only want to be around women for as long as it takes to fuck them. And feminism and the women who practice it are to blame, not men. Feminism made women absolutely unbearable to be around and impossible to form lasting bonds with, and so by default, men categorized you as nothing but the very sex objects feminists claim that patriarchy labels you as. That's why the Western woman is so intent on making sure everybody notices her outfit that showed just enough ass and tits for plausible deniability. At work, on the street, in the supermarket, at the DMV, at Blockbuster, and everywhere else. Because sex is all they are. They have nothing else. Ass and tits and painted up faces that make them look like clowns and heels that make them look taller than what they really are. That's all they have left. Now, some of the more perceptive Western women are starting to realize the size and scope of the trap they've been tricked into laying for themselves, but it really doesn't matter whether they see it or not. Because for the first time, men are on the precipice of adopting a line of thought that sticks a collective middle finger in the faces of Western femdom as a whole and tells them that this time, you're digging yourselves out of your own mess. The manginas that haven't figured out how much the very women they grovel to despise them aren't going to save you. You may have government catching you with their safety nets, but in reality all they can really do for you is throw more money at the symptoms of your misery. The feminist governments in the West are so good at hiding the fact that they're such a huge part of the cause of the Western woman's sickness that she believes government to be the cure for it. The Western skank isn't going to be saved by the hordes of doctors scripting her more antidepressants than ever, and she isn't going to be saved by going to church and expecting men to believe that that makes them somehow cleansed of the stench of the long list of men in her past. God may forgive your degeneracy, but men still know what you are, what you've done, and more importantly, who you've done, so you'll have to excuse us if we really aren't in the mood to accommodate reformed whores that want to be housewives. But even more than that, men don't even want housewives anymore. Because after a half-century of feminism, the only real result I can see is that women have lost their luster and retain only a fraction of the appeal they held in the days of fabricated oppression and patriarchy. And the worst part for them is that the fraction of appeal they've managed to hold on to, i.e. their pussies, depreciates in value with age and with use by other men. It's truly a sad state of affairs for Western women, but I can't say I really feel sorry for them, and that's because there's a new species of man emerging from the primordial ooze of the gender war, the Post Feminism Man, a type of man that terrorizes feminists because he refuses to serve, he refuses to bow, and he does what he wants to do. The Post Feminism Man isn't worried about pleasing women because he sees any women that isn't pleased with him as insignificant. He has a hair trigger mechanism ingrained into every fiber of his being that simultaneously and reflexively identifies and detaches him from any female he's involved with that gives him even one iota of feminist bullshit. He doesn't uphold, maintain, or pursue relationships. He's seen enough relationships to know that the ship is sinking. He isn't a partisan. He understands the futility of believing that the White House or the halls of Congress or Parliament or wherever his politicians conduct business are anything other than the ground zero epicenters of feminist power and influence. The Post-Feminism Man is a nice guy, thug, a bad boy or an educated man or whatever. He isn't concerned with providing for or banging child support obsessed baby mamas, and he recognizes these two groups of men as nothing more than two warring factions of men grandstanding and vying for access to used up pussy. He's not a race, he's not a sperm donor, he's not an ATM machine, or anything else. The only thing that the Post Feminism Man irrefutably is and will be is what he's always been. Just a man, ready and willing and fully equipped to withstand and confront Marxist feminism on all of its fronts.
Who in their right mind would object to equal rights for women? Feminism is nothing more than an ideology that preaches equal rights, but in reality it seeks only to destroy the mainstays of civilization, men and the family unit. Feminism, from day one, sought not to empower women, but to disempower men. Feminism and its enablers has for over half a century influenced the core beliefs, values and morality of societies the world over. The subtlety with which this has been achieved has for the most part gone unnoticed by the majority and has become acceptable, despite the degree of oppression and suffering caused to men and children as a result of this relentless campaign of misandry and hate. False rape and child molestation allegations, high-profile domestic violence campaigns aimed only at men and addressing only one half of the perpetrators guilty of this criminal act, all are shaming tactics aimed at gaining compliance from men. Not only are these psychological techniques used to shame men into compliance, they are also aimed at coercing men into handing over positions of power to undeserving and incompetent women under the guise of equality. A profound hatred of men has been instilled in women through persistent instruction and relentless and sustained smear and hate campaigns, all under cover of an idea of male patriarchy ruining their lives. Innocent men suddenly found themselves reeling from attacks on all sides. Marilyn French said, "All men are rapists, and that's all they are." Andrea Dworkin said, "Heterosexual intercourse is the pure formalized expression of contempt for women's bodies." She also said, "I want to see a man beaten to a bloody pulp with a high heel shoved in his mouth like an apple in the mouth of a pig." Susan Brown Miller said, "Rape is nothing more or less than a conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in a state of fear." Using endless statements such as these, men have been taught to hate themselves, and women have been taught to hate men. Homosexuality is promoted, but heterosexuality is something to fear. Single mothers are praised and elevated in status and value, while good fathers are systematically stripped of contact with their children. Divorce has been made so easy, it could be initiated and substantiated for the most minor of family and spousal disagreements. Religious values have been undermined. Communities have been shattered. False statistics on rape, sexual abuse, domestic violence and countless other anti-male issues were force-fed to a blind media hungry to sensationalize rumours and lies spread by these gossips. The result of this brainwashing has been to destroy the very fabric which held our societies together. A communist brainwashing manual begins with these chilling words: "In order to be conquered, a nation must be degraded, either by acts of war, by being overrun, by being forced into humiliating treaties of peace, or by the treatment of her populace under the armies of the conqueror. However, degradation can be accomplished much more insidiously and much more effectively by consistent and continual defamation." by attacking the character and morals of man himself, and by bringing about, through contamination of youth, a general degraded feeling, command of the populace is facilitated to a very marked degree. Men have been the target of this defamation for over half a century. It's time for men to shake off the false guilt laid upon them, and to remember that without our efforts, our genius, our organisational skills, our sweat and our blood, there would be no civilization at all. As men, we have much to be proud of. As men, very few of us have woken up in the morning with the intention of oppressing anyone, let alone women. As men, we have laid down our lives in countless wars to protect what the feminist movement claim we have oppressed. As men, we have raised our sons to take care of women and not brutalise them. As men, we have sacrificed our lives by remaining on sinking vessels at sea so that women and children could flee to safety in the lifeboats. As men, we are noble, proud and fierce defenders of family and all that we love and hold dear. Yet, as men, we are seeing our families destroyed by feminist propaganda. Our children are suffering terrible agonies as a result. It is time to remember those positive attributes of our manhood. Shake off the guilt of the last half century. Over 50 years of brainwashing. Stand up and cry out. No more.
Within the Borg consensus, there is no perfect consensus. That seems a bit paradoxical, but in fact it's not. You see, the Borg consensus, the Borg female consensus in reality, is defined by its opposition to opposing forces. That is to say, the Borg can only assimilate the other, and without the other there is nothing to assimilate. So the Borg really needs some sort of opposition to exist, to be defined. Otherwise there is no consensus, and consensus is built around assimilation. Likewise, with the female Borg consensus, in reality, very interesting things happen when there is no opposition. It's no coincidence that feminism, although not primarily a hate movement, has been said many times, certainly has gathered much of its energy around the idea of some sort of patriarchal oppression. You need a common foe. Because women, although they do have an in-group preference, which is demonstrable and has been studied and is now arguably irrefutable, that group preference needs to be put within the context of having some sort of opposition, right? Those interests, if men have them, will be opposed, collectively speaking, by the Borg consensus. But the Borg consensus, if there's a lack of concrete opposition, will resort to bickering, infighting, and self-destruction. A woman wanted to start an all-female company because of the quote-unquote boys club in television production. Much to her chagrin, she found out that the entire enterprise was a mess. Women were backstabbing each other, not doing their work, engaging in just completely tawdry behavior. You should read the article. It's very interesting. For example, some meeting she had with a man who was present at the meeting, some woman reached inside of her bra and tweaked her nipples at the guy at an official meeting. So this illustrates what I call the incongruities of the Borg consensus. The Borg consensus is only organized as long as there is opposition, and that's why feminism, being a perpetual female advocacy machine, still needs a focal point against which to advocate. So they advocate for themselves, but there also needs to be a polar opposite, some sort. It's like north and south. You need to advocate against the opposite of the pole. In this case, it's men's interests, whether they're feigned in their minds or not. That is to say, whether they're chimerical or not. Because after all, I mean, the patriarchy. Some feminists are still writing about this patriarchal control of this and that. But this serves the narrative for creating a congruous Borg consensus as opposed to an incongruous Borg consensus that we can see demonstrated in this article of women just literally they destroyed the company by having an all-female staff. This woman who thought she would be doing herself a favor and a favor to her fellow female kind, and then coming to the conclusion that there is no sisterhood. There is a sisterhood, but the sisterhood is conditional. It's conditional on having some kind of concrete, firm opposition that the sisterhood is opposed to, just like the Borg in Star Trek can only exist within the context of having others to assimilate to oppose them. The consensus is that you are to be assimilated and to agree with everything within the Borg community. But if there's nothing around you, if there's no enemy to oppose, that's kind of not really relevant anymore. So in a general sense, women will vote and look out for their interests as a collective group, whereas men don't do that. On a much more individual level, on a smaller scale, what you see between women is games of one-upmanship. However, these games of one-upmanship are not the games of competition you see within the male dominance hierarchy. They're quite different. You see, the female mind, the female physiology, everything about the female essence, if you will, is geared towards seeking out some being pampered, being privileged, getting the goodies. I mean, this is what they evolved to, primarily for themselves as well for their offspring. This is how women evolved. They evolved to get stuff, right? In a context without any firm male opposition, I'm using the term loosely, the perceived opposition, what you have is devolution. You'll have bickering, infighting, lack of harmony, because each woman is quote-unquote competing against each other for the sake of getting more privilege, getting more good stuff, appearing to be the best, not so as to, like a man would, compete as to have that status recognized. In a manless context, say in this office situation where you have just women fighting and bickering and willy-nilly total chaos, disorganization, what you begin to see are the incongruities of the Borg consensus. But the other element is that women will engage in a kind of competition of being pampered. Who is more worthy of being pampered? Who is more worthy of being venerated, if you will, of receiving all the goods, the cookies. You also see this in this article demonstrated, this phenomenon, because the few instances where there were some temporary male employee, they all, not only was their behavior better, but they all tried to one-up each other in an effort to prove who was the sexiest and what have you. Pretty ludicrous. But by and large, the Borg consensus is only as solid and as congruous as the opposition it has, be that in Star Trek or in reality. If there are no men against which to rally, the Borg consensus loses a lot of its momentum and it is reduced to infighting. This phenomenon doesn't exist amongst men. In fact, men, when there are no women present, tend to get along better. There's a lot more harmony, less violence. The exact opposite occurs with men. And you've heard many stories, and I've seen them, I've witnessed them live, and you've probably experienced them of women. Burn the Ender, who I've just discovered has his own channel, it's pretty good, I'd suggest you have a gander, describes women just hating on each other, and this is what they do. This is because the sisterhood is conditional. The sisterhood is conditional on having firm opposition, whether that opposition is real or not. In this case, men, that yes, the general female weal will be looked out for. Feminism looks out for is a perpetual advocacy machine for the common weal, the common female weal. And moreover, can you imagine? I mean, this is why the idea of an Amazonian civilization is so ludicrous. The level of degeneracy, chaos, disorganization, infighting, and backstabbing that resulted in this office environment would likely be the result of an all-female civilization. Nothing would get done, excuses would be made, and the pettiness would be so extreme that nothing could be accomplished. Once again, quite the opposite to what you see in an all-male environment. Men getting along, offering each other no double entendre compliments, cooperating, reciprocating generosity. That's what happens in a all-male, non-female environment. And the opposite happens in the incongruous Borg consensus environment. Like I said, you need firm opposition, and each woman is quote-unquote competing against each other to see who's more worthy of being pampered and getting goodies and being spoiled, and so on and so forth. So the Borg consensus is conditional. It does exist. They have an in-group preference. Remember, that study that I've cited many times, that has been cited elsewhere, I mean, that study was done whilst comparing male and female groups. The incongruities of the Borg consensus. There you have it, folks. Take care.
In this video, I'm going to talk about NAWALT, or Not All Women Are Like That. I know this topic has been covered before. I just want to give my own 2 cents on it. So this is just my take on NAWALT and the NAWALT argument, or the counter NAWALT argument, or all women are like that. Now I want to give a shout out to Marcus from the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of MGTOW. He's had an excellent mini-series called NAWALT Part 1 and Part 2, the deductive and inductive argument. Now Marcus is very philosophical. He uses the Socratic method. He references a lot of Greek philosophy in his videos. So if you're into that sort of thing, I highly recommend his channel. I'm going to be approaching this topic from a different angle though. So the NAWALT argument goes that all women will exploit men as resources and utilities. You'll always have a few female commentators come into the video comment section and say that not all women are like that you're just had a bad experience with some of the bad ones, but there are good women out there and blah 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 blah. Now that is essentially the NAWALT argument, which stands for, again, not all women are like that. Now there are different ways to respond to this argument. You could simply say that the exceptions prove the rule. So even if there are a few women that don't fit this description, the vast majority of women do. And so it simply makes logical sense not to try. Now John the Other uses the example of a minefield, that it is possible to walk through a minefield without getting blown up. However, it's really stupid, and you probably shouldn't do it. Or another example is if you had a bowl of candies and only 99% of them laced with poison, and one of them wasn't, you would still be stupid to take one of those candies and put it in your mouth. Now feminists do the same thing, where they say all men are rapists. Now clearly all men are not rapists, because most men have never committed a rape. The vast majority of men have never raped anybody in their entire life. And in fact, there are some men out there who are virgins, who have never even had sex. So how could they be rapists? Clearly not all men are rapists. So the best way to explain how I view NAWALT and the counter-argument against it is to look at potentiality versus actual action. Now some extreme feminists like to say that all men are rapists, all men rape, all sex is rape, really stupid shit. Now to flip that over to the NAWALT argument, are all women hypergamous? Yes. However, do all women act on their hypergamy? No. However, that doesn't change the fact that all women are like that, just like all men are like rapists. It doesn't mean all men are rapists. It doesn't mean all women will cheat on their spouse, will trade up. Not all women will act on those instincts, but all women have those instincts. So the key is consequences. If all men are like rapists, why don't more men rape? Well, it's because rape is a serious crime. Contrary to the narrative that we live in a rape culture, rape is one of the worst things you can be accused of. It will destroy your life, and if you're ever convicted of rape and sent to prison, you're probably going to get killed, because other inmates will kill you for being a rapist. Not to mention that you'll get raped yourself while you're in prison. Rape is taken very seriously and has absolutely serious consequences. It's probably one of the worst crimes you can commit without taking someone's life. And society reflects this through the serious laws imposed on those who are convicted of rape. However, society does not take the same stand against female hypergamy. In fact, contrary to the way society condemns and limits rape through really severe consequences, it not only doesn't do that in the case of hypergamy, it facilitates hypergamy. It incentivizes hypergamy, making the prevalence of hypergamy among women far greater than the prevalence of rape among men. So the question isn't about female nature, whether women are like that or whether men are like that. Clearly we are like that. Men are like that, women are like that. The question is the structures that society puts in place to counter and limit and check these impulses. We've done a really good job of limiting and checking the impulse of rape among men. Not only have we not properly checked female hypergamy in order to balance the society, we've incentivized female hypergamy. This incentivization happened under the guise of female liberation. Like I said in a previous video, when a woman gets married to a man, she has guaranteed access to that man's money through the state. He is required to take care of her. Even if they get a divorce, she will get half his stuff. Even if she didn't earn any of it. Like you see these celebrity marriages where the guy has several $1,000,000, he marries some supermodel, a couple years later they get divorced, she gets half of his money. Half of the money that he took a lifetime to earn and she had nothing to do with, she gets half of it. That's what a woman gets in a marriage. Kind of bullshit, but that's the way it is. Also, if you're married long enough, you will have to pay her alimony for the rest of her life. So not only is she getting half your stuff up front, she's getting about 20 to 25% of your stuff going forward. And if you have kids, you're going to be paying child support. You're probably going to be working for negative money if you're the average guy. Now, these are legal protections that the woman gets in the case of marriage. What legal protections does the man get? He gets absolutely none. Now, it wasn't always like this. Marriage wasn't always a terrible, shitty deal. It was just a bad deal. Now it's a terrible, shitty deal. The two main things that changed was a man lost his guaranteed right to sex, and he lost his guaranteed right to fidelity. A woman has always had and continues to have a guaranteed right to a man's income and resources. If the woman cheated on her husband, she was no longer given access to his money. In a divorce, if the man could prove adultery, she got nothing. No longer the case, because adultery laws have been overturned. That's one of the major things that changed. The other major thing that changed was marital rape laws in the 90s. Maybe she just decides to cut him off, says, you know what, we're never having sex again. There's nothing he can do. He can't take it, and if he leaves her, she's going to get all of his money, so he just can never have sex again. That's kind of a shitty deal. Especially when part of the marriage vows is to have and to hold, and to have means sexually. So that's your one job, ladies. That's your one fucking job. And I don't care if you have a headache, or you're on your period, or you're pregnant. Your mouth's not pregnant. Suck that cock. Anyway, I want to issue a challenge to these NAWALTs, these women who come on to MGTOW or other manosphere channels and say that not all women are like that. Some women care about this and care about that. Okay, here's your challenge. I want these women, instead of talking about rape culture and going to college campuses and talking about the wage gap, I mean, who really gives a shit? That doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things. I want these women to go out and try to make adultery illegal again. I want these women to go out and abolish marital rape laws. If you really care about getting men back to the plantation, you want to get men to start marrying women and dealing with women again, you have to give men an incentive to do so. Right now, there is no reason to deal with women. None. Now with yes means yes, I mean, dating and sex have always been kind of a shitty deal. The man goes and he takes all the risk. He asks the girl out. She could say no and embarrass him. If she says yes, he has to pay all the money, take her out however many times it takes to hopefully get some sex. And maybe she's just using him for money. Maybe he just has money, but she knows she can get a few nights of free dinners and entertainment, so she just uses him for some dates him for a couple weeks, and then decides to move on. And the guy just paid all this money and got nothing out of it. And some of you are like, oh, well, you know, that's just the way it works. You know, a woman doesn't owe a man sex, but a man owes a woman his money. He pays into this pot, taking a girl out with the expectation that it's going to move forward, and then she's just using him for money. So it's kind of bullshit. Now, it's always been kind of bullshit. It's just gotten more bullshit. So now a man not only has to worry about wasting his time, being embarrassed, wasting his money on dates that never go anywhere, and worrying about unplanned pregnancy, STDs, and all that shit. Now he has to worry about regret rape. He has to worry about the woman calling him a rapist the next day because the sex wasn't good, or she got in trouble with her boyfriend, or was late for work and decided to use the fact she was raped as an excuse and threw him under the bus in order to not get in trouble herself. And then with yes means yes, he has to prove the sex was consensual. So I did a video a while back about this app where they were trying to use cell phones to record consent, and then of course that's not going to fly anywhere. So really the only way to protect yourself as a man is to film the entire encounter start to finish to show that she never said no, never resisted, said yes over and over again throughout the entire encounter, basically filming a porn. So men, if you want to protect yourself against false rape allegations, you need to set up a hidden camera and make porn every time you have sex with a woman. Because if you don't film a porno, she's going to accuse you of rape and you're not going to have the evidence to exonerate yourself. However, I'm sure, I don't even know, but I'm pretty sure there's probably laws against that too. So you may get out of the false rape allegation, but then you're going to get in trouble with another law because you filmed a porno without her consent of wanting to be in a porno. So you're fucked no matter what. This is why men are walking away from women. It's not because of video games and porn. And ladies, if you want to change that, if you want to bring men back to the table, you need to change some things. Talking about the wage gap and confronting feminists on their bullshit isn't really going to fix that. We don't care. I don't give a shit about the wage gap. That's why I don't really make a video on it. It's bullshit. Everyone knows it's bullshit. It's been debunked a million times. You could debunk it a million more times and it won't change anything. If you want to change things, if you want to improve the relationship between men and women, you have to give men an incentive. And right now, you've done nothing but shit all over men, take away any protection men had, any reason a man had to get married, and then you're wondering why men don't want to get married. Well, there you go. There's your answer. Anyway, back to NAWALT, because I went on a pretty big tangent. I don't like the unicorn analogy, where NAWALTs are compared to unicorns, because NAWALTs do exist technically. They still have those instincts, they still have hypergamy, but they may not act on it. So instead of a unicorn, I actually prefer a white tiger. Now, a white tiger is extremely rare, just like NAWALTs are extremely rare. There's only about 200 white tigers in the entire world. And you can train white tigers, like Siegfried and Roy. They were a couple gay magicians who made white tigers part of their act. Now, the fact that they're gay isn't important to the story, but they are, so it's worth mentioning. Anyway, Siegfried and Roy used these white tigers in their act, and that's what they were famous for. They had white tigers, white lions, they had all kinds of fun stuff. And then one day in 2003, one of the white tigers bit Roy on the neck and almost killed him. He was in critical condition, he lost a lot of blood, he was in rehab for years. And it basically destroyed their show. They did a couple more shows and then they called it quits in 2010. Well, there you go, that was the end of their career. Because that one white tiger snapped. And here's the thing about NAWALTs. They could technically exist if you have a culture where female behavior is checked through cultural means, maybe through shame, maybe through societal expectations, maybe through religious dogma. But female behavior is checked, just like male rape is checked. It's not okay to rape people because we have consequences for rapists. So if you live in a culture or a society where there are consequences for hypergamy, either social or physical or legal or whatever, that's a check against hypergamy. That will cause there to be more NAWALTs. Here's the problem. When that environment changes, the female nature comes out. The moment you take your Russian or Asian bride from Asia or Russia back to the West, she will become like that. And the reason why is she was always like that. She just wasn't acting on it because there were consequences for her acting on it. Just like men aren't rapists because there are consequences to being a rapist. If a woman is a NAWALT because she's religious, the consequences that are holding her hypergamy back is the fear of hellfire. So she believes in God, she believes in the Bible, she believes that she's supposed to submit to her husband and she's supposed to be like that kind of woman, thus she's a NAWALT. But she's doing it because of fear of consequences. It's like the man doesn't rape because of fear of consequences, which is great. The problem is there's nothing stopping her from changing. A man can't change the consequences of his behavior. He's not in control of the legal system. But a woman could just decide one day that she doesn't believe in God. Maybe she heard a really strong atheist argument and just decided she doesn't believe in God. Or maybe she just doesn't believe in the God of the Bible. And maybe she changed religion to something that's more permissive of hypergamy, or even endorses hypergamy. Like these crazy people who believe that God's a woman and shit like that. Whatever. I don't even care. But the point is she could change her religious views. And if she changes her religious views, she's going to change her behavior. And if you're already married to her, and she just decides, you know what, I'm not going to be a Christian anymore, and now I'm going to act on my hypergamy, there's nothing the man can do to protect himself. Because the society doesn't protect him. It's all internal to the woman and her religious beliefs, which she could change at the drop of a hat. Anyway, my point is, once the woman gets married, she can now use the state in order to extract the resources from her husband, and she has no incentive to continue to be a NAWALT. She can drop the mask at any time, there's nothing the man can do. This is why MGTOW don't care if you're a NAWALT. Even if you are technically a NAWALT because you don't act on your hypergamy, you still have that potentiality, and you will always have that potentiality. And there's nothing stopping you from acting on it once you get what you want. All women have the potentiality to act on their hypergamy at any time. The only thing that stops a small minority of them is cultural training. They've been conditioned by their culture and environment not to act on that. However, just like the white tigers, that can change the drop of a hat. So anyway, those are my thoughts on NAWALT. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was pretty much almost completely non-scripted except for some things that I looked up. So thank you for watching. Please like, favorite, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
I'm glad that I put up my Laura Logan video because it gave me some valuable insight into the work that needs to be done in order to set men on the correct path to their own empowerment. My Laura Logan video helped to reveal to me that many MRAs don't fully understand what the concept of gender war is all about and what it fully entails. And in this video I said that if I were to see a woman being raped, I would continue on as if nothing ever happened. And I still stand by that statement unapologetically, and I assert that I'm 100% justified in this line of thought. Now, the fact that I said this must have triggered some innate male protector instinct in many MRAs that the rest of us who actually understand what gender war is all about have eschewed a long time ago. And their main argument was that I'm promoting violence against the entire female gender by saying that I wouldn't risk my life to protect a woman from violence unless she was a member of my family. I think the problem here is that maybe men have not yet started to consider that when women and society at large decided to burden men with the job of selflessly saving women from violence, that this was an act of violence against the entire male gender. The draft was an act of violence against the entire male gender. The gender selective rescue effort on the Titanic was also, and the expectation that it's a man's duty at great personal risk to himself, his person, and his life to save adult females from violence is an act of violence against men. And all my video does is neutralize that violence that has been foisted on men by advocating an act of nonviolent non-action. That's right, refusing to defend women from violence is an act of non-action and therefore cannot be violent in any way. Yet you have feminists and MRAs alike claiming that I advocate rape. You even have one feminist saying that for me to advocate non-action in regards to violence towards women is an admission of rape, which is just another attempt to broaden the definition of rape and another reason why men shouldn't defend women from it. MRAs whining about my stance amounts to the same tired old NAWALT tactics, not all women are feminists, so on and so forth. These simpletons really are starting to tire me. Not all women are fat lesbian man haters that pen scum manifestos on their free time, sure. However, how many women have trapped men via child support and alimony, a form of legalized slavery? How many women are actively speaking out against this type of enslavement? If you were to take the average woman on the street and ask her if she supports child support and alimony enforcement for women in divorce and custody disputes, what do you think she'll say? Most women are feminists by association and approval of feminist doctrine. They are feminists by proxy, and any MRA that says otherwise has failed miserably at understanding the true nature of feminism. Women have used their most desired biological asset, their reproductive ability, to subjugate the men who naturally desire to perpetuate the human race. They have legislated their biological greed aggressively against men in order to use the state to demand more of the myriad of biological assets that men bring to the table, such as productivity, adaptability, ingenuity, and most importantly, the ability to defend the female collective. They've used the trade-off of outdated and breached chivalrous social contracts to obligate us to defend them, while they either abort your reproductive payoff or use it to enslave you with child support, which we all know is just a euphemism for women's support. Now, the ability to defend the female collective is the only biological male quality that, at least as of now, the state cannot force us to engage in the civilian sector at least. And so any true tactician will identify that as a chink in the armor and withhold that defense. It's a planned, non-aggressive sanction that simultaneously empowers men and places a responsibility on women's defense right where it should be, on women. Now, I don't want to hear any MRAs whining about honor and principle. We're fighting a gender war because of honor and principle. We should be intelligent enough to realize that people are going to pick and choose very carefully about who they are going to stick their necks out for, and I can guarantee you that the vast majority of women will not risk their own personal safety to stop violence towards men in any way. You're a man in an MRA, so start acting like one. Identify with us as an in-group, not feminists and not women, and try to attain a level of awareness higher than the utopian REM sleep that you've been living in if you think that men and women aren't at war with each other. Men and women are in direct competition with each other. And I'm going to say that again. Men and women are in direct competition with each other. We are competing for resources, healthcare, education, our children, our money, our legal equality, and our freedom. And yes, women are doing this of their own volition. Some MRAs say, well, isn't the state the real enemy? Women are being manipulated also. They suffer from feminism as well. And my response to that, if it weren't for the need to explain this as best I can, would be who cares whether or not women are victims. This is a men's movement, so we will concern ourselves with men's issues, period. This isn't some fantasy reality where men and women are going to get together and sing Kumbaya and forget that feminism ever happened. Once again, women have acted as a collective against men for the better part of 60 years. But let's explore this whole women are victims too pussy pass mentality that a lot of so-called MRAs have. Now, I use the example of a pit bull and its master. If he sicks his pit bull on you and you have a gun in your hand, will you then use that gun against the pit bull even though the pit bull is only following the wishes of its master? Does the fact that the pit bull cannot comprehend what it's doing make the pit bull any less of a danger to you? Such an example only partly illustrates what's going on in the gender war between men and women and the state. The pit bull is blindly following an order from its master. It's a pawn, a tool incapable of reasoning. Women, however, were only given the opportunity to attack men, and they possess all the powers of reasoning of a fully functional adult human being. In the last scenario, the pit bull is a tool that the master used with malicious intent, whereas women were given the tools with which to attack men and left to their own devices. They willingly chose to attack men. They actively sought and lobbied for laws that made it easier to attack men and harder for men to defend themselves. They, since the very beginning of modern feminism, have acted not as innocent pawns that were manipulated into committing acts of evil, but as willing collaborators that used the promise of preferential treatment over men from the state as a means of attacking men. So my question is, when exactly will men fight back, and why exactly does the mere suggestion of breaching our part of the already defunct social contract by placing the responsibility of women's safety on the shoulders of women lead inexorably to a disingenuous and thoroughly disgusting marathon of white knighting on the part of self-professed MRAs, calling for obligatory male defense provisions for women? Don't give me that "it's not about saving women, it's about honor" bullshit. Women haven't acted honorably for almost 3 times longer than I've been alive. Fuck that. Take that apathetic, traitorous garbage somewhere else. Like my fellow MRA Richard Rich said, the men's rights movement isn't some sanctimonious Justice League. MRAs don't have the right to interject their selective, gender-based morality into this movement. We're focusing purely on men's issues, men's rights, and the empowerment of men. How exactly will telling men to risk their lives to save women from violence help to achieve this? It won't. And in a society where men are still going to be considered rapists no matter what we do, there is no reason to help a woman out of a violent situation up to and including rape. Due to rape shield laws and the fact that they violate the right to face your own accusers, a man cannot receive a fair trial when accused of rape, and therefore there's no reason to ever convict a man of rape. These are the harsh realities of the gender war. We will not give economic opportunities to women. We will not hire them to any jobs. We will reserve that position for a qualified and competent man to combat discriminatory affirmative action laws against men. We will never spend money on relationships between men and women. We will reinvest that money into our own individual male interests to combat the economic warfare that women and the state have instituted against men. We will assess the weak points of the partnership between women and the state, and we will exploit it and fight against females and the state. Now, are there females that have earned the right to call themselves men's rights advocates and activists? Sure there are. Women like Erin Pizzi come to mind, absolutely. But it's time we start fighting fire with fire. A group of people that insist on the defense of another group of people who have attacked them mercilessly for decades is not acting honorably, it is acting stupidly. Men as a collective should never be hesitant or even ashamed to take drastic measures to fight feminism. And that's all I really gotta say for now.